Okay, so it looks like we're live now. Um, I have to admit that I'm late, and I didn't plan on being late, but things happen. I'm supposed to be starting at 12:15 Central Standard Time, but I'm here now to 1:03, 1:04 p.m. in Chicago. I wanted to do a quick demo about setting up multiple environments in an Amezmo instance. So let's start off with launching a new instance, and then we'll go over how it works. And it's very simple. It's very, very simple. We're just going to import two different repositories that have different branches. So let's start with launching the instance. I'm going to launch in the North American region. Just going to do a quick tweet and okay, so instance is launched, and let's import our repo. And I'm doing a demo repository that's on GitHub. It's at github.com/amezmo/demo.amezmo.com. I'm going to paste this in the chat real quick. Oh, that was wrong. So we're going to import the repo from GitHub. And I'm going to import the master branch, and I'm going to consider that our production or live environment. And I'm going to choose Laravel because we're using a Laravel application. Amezmo will automatically set the document root, and we can optionally install the packages automatically. I'm going to do that today because it's easier than having to maintain the deployment hook. But we can do custom things in deployment hooks, like install npm packages or other activities. So I'm using demo.amezmo.com, and that is going to be considered our live domain. So now we're doing a bunch of things at GitHub, setting up the container instance for first time Git import, and we're setting a webhook at GitHub to inform us when a push happens. We're also setting up a deployment key at GitHub that will allow Amezmo read-only access to the repository to be able to pull it when changes are made. I think that's a really important point because when you're hosting code in places, you don't want the person or the company that's hosting the code to be able to modify it, right? So that was an early on decision that we made to apply the minimum amount of permissions as possible. And if you're interested in single repo access, Amezmo also supports that by using the GitHub version 2 of the API, where you can grant single repo access only. Okay, so we've imported our repo. Everything's okay. Let's check out the site. Okay, so the site is live. We are at the master branch, and things seem to be working. Okay, so what is a staging environment? So staging environment's just a place that isn't on your main domain, and it allows you to test changes that you'll later merge into production or give to your client or run on the internet for live use. So when we create features and we're using a Git flow type of workflow, we usually create branches to merge later into master. So if we have a new branch called development, and development has a new feature that we're doing, we want to be able to see that live, but not live in our application because we haven't finished testing. We haven't gotten approval from the client, or we haven't figured out if we're going to want to have it in production. So we can set up a second repo. Second repo is just a repo of the same name, but it doesn't have to be, it could be two different repos. You can host two different sites on Amezmo, and it doesn't have to be a staging environment. It's very generic. But the important thing is the branch name's going to be different for us. So I'm authorizing Amezmo again, and we're going to pick the same repo that we picked prior, but we're going to set the branch to development. And I created a development branch locally and pushed it up to GitHub before the video started. So when you choose the application type, it informs Amezmo of various features that it can help you create and various configuration settings that will auto-populate based on the app type. So let's click automatically install composer packages to make our life easier. And this is another key part. We can't use demo.amezmo.com because that's in use. So let's add a dummy domain, or a domain that we'll later edit the DNS settings for. But for now, we're not going to have a top-level domain associated with our development branch. And I'm going to configure automatic deployments later. So what's happening now? We are going into the container instance, and we're creating a second directory. And this directory will hold our development branch. So it's not a separate server instance or container instance. It's running on the same exact container, but the only difference is that Amezmo knows about it, so it doesn't apply global changes you make to both repositories/applications, and different domain names can be associated with different branches. So we've succeeded. If you look in the raw output, it says getting development from GitHub, and that's great because that's our development branch. So the important thing too is how do we associate demo.amezmo.com from our development branch? So we go to the Git tab, and then we see that we have two of the same branches, two of the same repos, but this one has development there. On Amezmo, there's a private/internal domain that gets created specifically for each repo that can be disabled later. But we're going to use that for now because we didn't add our custom domain, and we don't have to. If we don't need a fancy top-level domain for our development purposes, we can just use Amezmo's amezmo.co domain. So this change isn't that obvious, but if we look, this is a sample change. And if we look at demo.amezmo.com, we'll see that they are actually different. So let's go into the code then. Let's edit something. So I'm in the development branch, and I'm going to make it a more obvious change, like development branch, or something like that. I don't have a good use case for this yet, but this is just a sample change so we can look at our stuff. So we're going to run git push. And we didn't set up automatic deployments for our development environment, but we probably should have. Later we can add that. We should actually have it as production doesn't have automatic deployments, but development does, because we want to approve changes before they're automatically pushed into development. So let's go ahead and launch that deployment. and we're going to launch the development deployment. And these are also zero downtime deployments too. It doesn't matter if it's a development branch or a master branch. Both of them are going to be zero downtime. And the zero downtime pattern that Amezmo uses is the atomic directory swap pattern. It doesn't launch a new container and change the internal routing to point to the new container. That's actually an option as well, but that way is just not used on Amezmo yet. Possibly in the future it would, but it is a little bit more complex to handle that. So if we go to our development branch, we can see that this is the development branch, and this master branch / production environment did not change. So cool. What can we do with this? So we can test out new features in our development branch that aren't affecting production, because we have access to the database, we have access to the container, and we can use that to our advantage if we're testing a new feature that doesn't write data to production. But for example, let's say you need to drop a column in production because you're migrating from a JSON-based column to like an actual table. In Amezmo, that was a really common thing in the beginning in 2018. Lots of things were JSON columns in the beginning, but then they quickly migrated to like actual tables. For example, like domain names that could be stored in JSON, but then once you have more complex needs, you'll want to store in a separate table. So eventually you're going to have to migrate the JSON column to a full column / table structure. And it would be nice to be able to run the potential future use of the new table structure in a staging environment and not have to just push it blindly and then wait for a customer to complain, or not complain, but just report the bug. Because then that puts a lot of pressure on you as a developer to fix things, and it's just a lot of stress, right? If we knew it was going to break something that we didn't account for, we can handle that edge case in a staging environment and not be concerned about reproducing customer data locally or having to dump our production database and import it locally. So in the future, we're going to also be able to control the access to our apps / environments. Right now, HTTP authentication's applied globally to your sites, but that's actually on the feature list that Amezmo is going to implement. We're going to be able to control it by environment and not globally. And when I was saying earlier that development has access to the database, that isn't required. You could have a development database as well. It's just that the key thing is that the applications are launched into the same container instance. And you have access to the database. You can create a new background worker that is associated with only the master environment or the development environment, and things will work great. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. The demo part has pretty much concluded, but I'm going to continue talking about some other things that you can do with this type of setup, right? A benefit of having the staging environment on the same instance is that you don't have to create two separate instances to host two different environments / two different versions of your application. Because if we wanted to do a horizontally scaled version of this multi-environment, then we could create two instances on Amezmo, right? First instance hosts master, second instance hosts our development environment, and then we could create a separate database-only instance on Amezmo and have both of our environments talking to that database cross-network. And Amezmo supports that absolutely, right? It'll be secure too, because when you launch an instance on Amezmo, you can share the instance with other instances in your account, and securely talk over the wire in your dedicated network. And that's secured by default. Like, no one can talk to you, no one can ping you. I don't know if you remember when DigitalOcean first came out with their private networking feature. In order to secure your services listening on the private 10.0.0.0 network, you'd have to set up IP tables manually, because that was a time when DigitalOcean didn't have that built-in firewall. So part of the motivation to implement that secure by default firewall access on Amezmo is that I wanted it to be as frictionless as possible and be able to produce a secure production-ready application environment as fast as possible, right? I don't want to do DevOps. I don't want to do various housekeeping things that take me away from building features for my client or iterating on my product. But that's also an option. It's just a more expensive option, and it's more work, right? I like the simple use case of having both environments on the same container instance and in the same network. And if you're interested in knowing some more of the internals, right, the container root directory is listed on the Git repo page. And on the Git repo page, we have the root directory, and the root directory shows us where exactly in the container it's located. So if we set up SSH access, we can check that out. But that's kind of a boring thing. I don't think I'll do that today. So yeah, that's the multi-environment setup. It's very simple to get started. By default, the standard instance type on Amezmo supports 2 repos / 2 environments, and we can see that it's pretty simple to get started, right? It's easy. It doesn't take much effort. It doesn't take much of a hassle. It doesn't take a lot of thought. It's just kind of works by default. And yeah, that's it. In the next video, I'll show us how we can speed up our website using caching. So if you run WordPress or something like some other dynamic PHP application that must dynamically create the page each time, you know, it gets kind of expensive to call into PHP FPM each time that you want to render a static page. Blog content doesn't change often, right? If it does, you can invalidate your cache. But I just want to show you the effect of caching real quick. We recently launched this feature called caching, and it's a fast CGI cache structure under the hood, and it really speeds up the site significantly. See, I'm caching everything now. This is my regular expression rule, but I'm going to remove that for now, and I'm going to disable caching. And in the first version, we invalidate the cache upon deployment, so I'll have to deploy to purge the cache. But in the future, there will be API access and other advanced ways to purge the cache. But for now, I'm going to show you the effect of enabling the cache and how much faster it works. As soon as this deployment's done, we'll refresh the page. The blog.amezmo.com page, that is. Okay, so the deployment succeeded. So let's look at the network tab here. We loaded the page and it's 737 milliseconds. That was the first load. But when we cache it, it improves the speed significantly. So let's enable caching again, and then we'll refresh the page. So we'll flip the switch to cache, and then we'll set our regular expression rule to cache everything. Yeah, so the caching really was modeled off Cloudflare's admin page, and lots of the features were kind of borrowed. So the settings page just allows us to ignore the query string, similar to how Cloudflare does it. But that's very confusing. I tried to make it sound very simple, so we're ignoring the query string. So don't allow the query string to invalidate cached pages. So if we're doing pagination or something, then the fast CGI cache will still be there. So now we'll enable the page. So we cached it, and we literally just saved, like, I don't know how many milliseconds, but over 100, because now it's 46 milliseconds to load this dynamic WordPress page. And that's kind of, it's crazy how simple that feature can speed up our pages. Now we're not going to PHP, we're not going to FPM. We're just submitting the static content as the HTTP response, and Nginx is handling everything, which is cool. I think that's a great way to speed up sites. I actually implemented that on Amezmo.com recently, and this feature was inspired by inspired from the podcast I was on Dev Mode with Andrew Welsh, and other guests or other some of the hosts were saying, "Oh, well, you shouldn't implement that feature because not everyone needs that." But I think it's a great feature because it really makes things a lot faster than it would if you had to render this WordPress page. Well, cache rules respect headers sent in the response from the server. Okay. So right now the headers that are ignored are the cache expires and set cookie, because there were some issues with Nginx not caching the page and not making it obvious that there was an issue with the response headers because of the caching headers. So in the first version, I wanted to respond with a header called like X cacheable, X Amezmo cacheable, and that would inform Nginx to cache the page. But that was prone to some issues, because if that applies to even one response, then the caching would be enabled and it would ignore the URL. That's something that's still on my list, but in version 1, you have to input the URL page rules, unfortunately. I know that's kind of a pain, but it works pretty well for now. But I would love if it was dynamic, right? Like, oh, well, I'm caching the pricing page. I'm just going to respond with a header called X cacheable, and then it'll inform Amezmo to cache the page automatically without having to mess with any page rules and regular expressions and things like that. So yeah, it's Nginx based. I thought about using Varnish. I might use Varnish in the future. It would be nice to have that Lua type of dynamic functionality. I think they use Lua. I don't know if HA Proxy has advanced caching like Nginx does, but like I was saying earlier, that having that header would be cool. I guess I'm thinking about, what if a PHP response requested that it is not cached? Yes. Well, it's a great question, and it's really important to put in the exact rules that you'll need cached, because if caching's on, as you see, like the green switch, it's not going to cache anything until there's a page rule to be set. Even if it's on it doesn't cache anything automatically unless there's an actual page rule to be met. But adding those headers would be something that could be useful. I'm trying to think of the use case for that, like an admin page or something. The cookie gets expired, but yeah, so it ignores the pragma. Actually, I don't think it ignores pragma. We just ignore cache control. Let's open up the code real quick. I'll show you. So the backend's written in Python. So I'll show you exactly what I'm using. So when caching is enabled, we do fastcj cache config and ignore headers. So we're ignoring cache control expires and set cookie. But if pragma no cache is set, see, that's the disadvantage of using Nginx, because we can't set the header in an if statement. And that's why I want to go to Varnish or something that supports a Lua/scripting language. Because if we had the ability to set the cache behavior, then we wanted to be able to like invalidate the cache dynamically based on the HTTP response. So cache control expires. Pragma no caches. That's an actual header too. Pragma. Yeah. That was the disadvantage of using Nginx for it, because I wanted to be able to do that, like dynamically cache the page or not cache the page, not based on a set of page rules, because page rules are kind of a pain in the ass to do. Very error prone. You have to write a bunch of regular expressions, and so I think in the version 2 I'm going to move to more advanced caching structure. Okay, so Cloudflare respects pragma and cache control. Yeah, so we can see if that'll work. Yeah, Cloudflare does have that setting. They have the setting of respect existing headers or something like that, I think. Let's see. Browser cache CTL. Oh, well, that's for static caching, I think. Terminal time. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to have to look into how they do it, because, like I said, Cloudflare was definitely the motivation among the architecture. Does not catch HTML content. Okay. I believe Nginx respects pragma and cache control headers, but I get they're using Nginx sketching here. Yeah, I think Cloudflare uses Nginx as well. They used to have a header called like Cloudflare Nginx. I don't know if they still have that header, but it's cool though. Like Cloudflare, you can put Cloudflare in front of Amezmo and also cache there. But definitely want to look into those headers, because I don't want it to be an issue that causes like data leakage for people. And cache control expires. We shouldn't have to care about that. I mean, we shouldn't have, Nginx shouldn't care about ignoring those headers. So that's something I'm going to test right after our video. Yeah, but so the caching's purged at deployment time, or after a successful deployment happens right now, and that's kind of a pain. But in version 1, that was the kind of lowest path to resistance to get the feature pushed to production for people to use. And we're going to be opening up api.amezmo.com to the public soon. And in there, we're going to be able to basically do everything we can do on the dashboard. But I'm going to start with the caching because sometimes you don't want to cache, you don't want to invalidate a cache after you deploy. Like when I deploy Amezmo.com, the actual static site, I don't need to purge like the docs, for example, if I change the pricing page. Definitely want to respect those headers though. You wouldn't cache a request with an authorization header necessary. Nice, Joseph. Thanks. You wouldn't cache a request with an authorization header necessarily. Yeah, and if this request is a post request, it's not going to be cached. But I know there's some requests you can do with the authorization header that would be like an OAuth request. Like the GitHub API, they have some get endpoints that take authorization header. See, that's one of the disadvantages of using Nginx too, because I think you can't tell them when to not when to bypass the cache. Because I would love to have an if statement, like if upstream response comes with something like authorization header or something, or like don't cache, then we automatically bypass the cache, right? But page rules are cool for now. Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Ben, too, for this dialogue. It's really cool to be able to talk. I wish we could all have a group video. I don't know if YouTube does that. But yeah, this was cool. This caching stuff really improves things. Really makes things faster. Like it's pretty crazy. I was really impressed. I mean, because WordPress is already slow as hell automatically. So has anyone used Varnish? Have you guys used Varnish before? How is that? Or HA proxy? Not sure if there's anything else. For that flexibility, I think you could have the apps send headers for caching and don't ignore them with fast CGI cache. So remove fast CGI headers, ignore. Not there a caching plugin. So Ben, how do you do it then? Do you purge the cache? Well, how would you purge the cache from the page response? Because think about it. When we cache things, we're actually not going to the fast CGI layer. So if it has been cached, then we have to purge that cache from an outside domain, and the domain as in not the HTTP request, right? Do you have an admin panel or something? Um, I think I saw this plugin though. Um, there might be two. If this isn't the one from NY Studio, right, Ben? This is yours. Is there two then? Because I saw one in the craft store that was dealing with fast CGI. Ah, Cloudflare Purge. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, Cloudflare handles a lot of things and it's free. It's like, wow, they are giving away this service that's so useful and it's free basically, like for adding page rules. Well, you can only add 3 in the free plan, but then you can buy more. And they have a CDN. But I think that the free plan isn't doing the geo based caching. I think you have to enable Argo for that. The plugin is Blitz. Okay, Blitz. Yeah, that's awesome. You have that graph. That's awesome. Intelligent static page testing. Okay, cool. That's awesome. I love that you have like it extensible, right? You just plug in a driver and then it can use anything on the back end for purging caches. I initially thought that it was doing like a remove RF of the cache directory, but this is pretty impressive, right? Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, we have Forge there. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like caching is like the secret to making things fast. But think about writing the things, right? Yeah, varnish isn't that cool anymore, Joseph, right? It's like I remember when it was really popular on Hacker News and things like that. I don't know. Yep, purging is a problem for sure, and naming things, right? Such a lame joke. Two problems in CS, two hard problems in CS, right? Naming things and cache invalidation. I think it's funny. I think like when someone knows that joke, it shows that they like really like programming and they like I don't know, just being around well, they read a lot about coding and things like that. That should be an interview question. I think that at the time peeps were still using Apache. And the virtual hosts, right? Virtual hosts. All right, cool. Thanks, Ben, too, for coming in and showing us about your caching plugin. And Well, this was really fun. Really, I had a good time. Um, well, I always like talking about code, and it was cool. Really love Craft CMS too. Ben comes from Craft CMS community. Well, I mean that doesn't define him as a person. Not defining him as the Craft CMS god, but um, I know Ben from Craft CMS, the Craft CMS community. I know Joseph. We used to work together. Joseph and I used to sit right next to each other. Yeah, the Python app. It's actually, I mean, it's PHP on the front end, right? But it's all Python on the back. All the queues and all the workers, it's Python. And why didn't I use PHP? Well, I don't know. I didn't want to use PHP for long running processes. I just didn't want to run daemons in PHP because I just didn't feel like it was the best tool. I love Python too. It reminds me a lot of C. I actually programmed in C a lot before I started Amezmo. I love C, C-based programming language, or C, the C programming language. And Python really, really reminds me of C in that it has like everything you can do in C pretty much, but it makes it a lot faster to do it, and it makes it a lot easier to do things. Yeah, but I love PHP too. I mean, PHP is awesome. Love the object-oriented type of language that PHP has. How well does Python handle long-running processes? Handles it really well. So it uses, I don't know how much memory, but I monitor it, and things work really well, like in terms of CPU usage and everything. We can see I'm on my development mode here, so I have 4 workers, and these are all like Python applications, and they're daemons. Well, they're not technically daemons. I don't actually fork and then exit the parent process. Systemd supports running your processes as a daemon, and that's so great about Systemd. Systemd just handles everything. I log to syslog, and then that happens automatically. Like the logging happens automatically. Everything's awesome. I don't have to worry about daemonizing the actual app. If we look at like service file, um, uh, yeah. So how does it work? Well, basically, well, not basically. How it works is the queue, the queue waits. The while true loop waits on activity from Redis. So we can look at one of them. So we have this Hertz, whatever, watchdog Hertz. I don't know if that's the correct term, but it basically means how long it's going to sleep before it goes to Redis again. But see, we have this queue.take, and that really is listening for Redis. And then once it gets a package, we do the work of the package. And we have particular processors for each job type. So for example, if you have a job called like enable caching, we have a particular class that goes in and handles all the work and implements an interface for it. So this is the synchronous queue, but there's also a non-blocking queue that can process up to like 4 or 8 jobs simultaneously. So like naturally the queue is rate limited, so it can't like be overwhelmed because it processes one job at a time. But that hasn't been a problem in practice because there's a time limit on the user defined operations that happen. Yeah, but Python handles it pretty well, though. I really haven't had any issues with it. And I think Python's cool because it just is powerful. Like, it reminds me of C. Well, I don't know. I keep saying that, but signal handling is something you have to worry about when you're running a daemon that is processing jobs. So, like, if I deploy the workers right now, then we wouldn't want to like just kill the process and start again, because what if we're in the middle of deployment? So to handle asynchronous signals is kind of a challenge because it's not safe to do things in a signal handler. So you have to kind of set a flag that a signal has happened and then do your stuff. I don't know if you guys know the signal function, system call, signal, signum, and then callback pointer. You're not supposed to do anything in those signals because there's man pages that say which functions are asynchronous safe, and that if you call any of those methods inside the signal handler, it can kind of make your program not have predictable behavior. So the pattern to handle signals is to set a flag in your signal handler. But before you set the flag, make sure the first call is to ignore that signal that you're listening for. Because you don't want them to propagate against each other. And then when we get a signal, for example, to stop, then we'll exit things cleanly. But if we get a signal to restart, like if I deployed the workers now, we execute ourselves. So that's interesting. Execute ourselves. So basically we run an execute VE. Yeah, that's a little bit of the under the hood stuff. Yeah, but I love Python, love PHP, love doing things like in terms of like queuing things and handling background processes, because everything's asynchronous pretty much. Like when you do things on here, like enable the job, it doesn't do anything really in the PHP land. PHP just like delegates the work out to the workers, and the workers are communicated over Redis. It's really simple. Not simple, but in theory it's simple. It's not using RabbitMQ or anything. It's just using Redis as a queue. So yeah, the cache, that's going to be the next thing. Okay. API for this, and then figure out those headers things. Hopefully this chat, I'm going to have to take some notes here because I don't want to lose the chat notes. But yeah, this is cool. So I guess it's all I'll talk about today. I don't want to keep changing subjects. Don't want to keep changing gears because I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place. But this was cool. I'm really happy that people came, and I'm really happy that we were able to talk. It was awesome. And yeah, a lot of things to come. Still going to be iterating on things. Lots of new features are coming. Basically, the features come from listening to people, right? Like listening to what people use and how they use, various services, and then implement these features to make developers' lives easier and make their applications faster, and then support the customers of Amezmo by answering questions they have and making things easy. Thanks. Thank you. I remember talking to a person that was trying to do something similar to me, like in the beginning, and they were like doing a bunch of SSH commands like at the request time. But I definitely saw some problems with that because you would be like waiting on the response for a while. So when you launch an instance on Amezmo, like the instances are backed by an AWS instance, moving to bare metal soon, but these instances are provisioned by like memory and CPU usage. So it's basically like one huge instance, like one 16 gigabyte T3 instance or something like that, maybe 8 gigabytes. But Amezmo keeps an internal inventory of like how many instances are allocated on that host, and if it can't fit, then we don't allocate it there. We'll create a new host or something like that. Robinhood/Fost. Okay, I'll have to check that out then. Um, but cool, guys. I'm gonna check that out. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. It's really awesome to talk. It would be cool if this was all live. They should have something like that, right? Maybe Skype. It's kind of a chat